Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Staying, a special video podcast series right here inside the Louisiana Conference. I am your host, Todd Rossnagel. It is great to have you along with us again for another episode. Our two special guests for this episode is the Reverend Dr. Van Stinson, who has been with us since the very beginning, and Bishop Cynthia Fierro Harvey, our first guest. And this is our last episode.
Can't believe it.
We are bringing the plane in for a landing, if you will. And so we wanted to kind of bookend the entire series with Bishop Harvey to get her thoughts and to talk about everything that we've learned, that we've heard together for so many of you who have been paying attention to the video series. And so we thank you for that. And we have a lot of ground to cover.
We do.
We've seen and heard from so many people. We've seen and heard from so many of you at home with comments. And so we're going to kind of go over some of our top moments that kind of stood out to the three of us. And we'll probably leave some out, but, we can't be here all day. But at the same time, we hope that this is productive for you to kind of hear what was on our hearts, and we hope that this entire series has been helpful to those of you who want to talk more about staying in the United Methodist Church. And so, Bishop Harvey, before we kind of get to some of those, just your initial thoughts on this entire series, how it's gone, and what you've been able to discern.
I have learned a lot
Yeah.
from all of our guests. And the one thing that just kept coming to mind as I listened is the courage that it took for people to be a guest on this podcast. It took people way out of their comfort zones for most of them. It was risky for a Jessica Trahan to be our guest. It was way out of Katie Black's comfort zone. She doesn't usually talk about these things really publicly very much. She emailed me about that. So all of our guests have taken a risk by saying yes, which makes me really understand the commitment that these folks have had to staying. And for all the guests that we've had, there's probably another 100 people we could have had as our guests. So I'm hoping that, I know you're going to give us some prompts on how we can continue to tell this story, even though this might be our last staying podcast episode. There might be ways for people to continue to share their own stories about staying. But I just think the courage that some of these folks had to even just come to this table.
Yeah. Van, what runs through your mind? You've been here for all of them.
Yeah. Well, picking up on the courage theme, conversation in the current times we are living in takes courage. Mm-hmm. It takes courage to come to the table, to sit down, to share yourself, to share your thoughts, and to give grace to someone else to share theirs as well. I've been encouraged by each of our guests. I've been inspired, and it's given me a reminder of just what an important season we are living through, and how each word has something to say to the situations we are in right now. And I celebrate that.
Yeah,
I do.
I think all three of us have great things to say about all of our guests. Our most recent guest was Reverend John Wynn, and he talked about unity and uniformity and the difference between the two. And he also said that if there's any kind of splintering is going to be harmful, however many sides. If you create this new group, you look to your left, you look to your right, there's always going to be someone who you disagree with. So what's the point?
When you're in a new group, after you're in that new group, the new global Methodist Church, you're going to look to your left or right or somewhere, and you're going to say, that person is saying something I don't agree with. Or that person is saying something I don't agree with. Because it's relative. The whole thing is relative. And relative to where you're standing, there's going to be somebody that's going to be on a different end of the seesaw than you're on. So what have you accomplished?
He was quintessential John Wynn. And you could see where he kind of hit his stride in the interview. We listened to it. I got to preview it. So I'm always fortunate in that way. But yeah, he said some things that were just the unity without uniformity. That's sort of been our DNA as United Methodists, is that we're unified in these things, but we don't all have to be the same. And he pointing out, probably the three of us here, pick whatever topic, the likelihood of us agreeing on everything is just not going to happen. So, it pains me that these are the reasons why we are in this place. And yet it has been such an important part of who we are as United Methodists. I took notes as I listened to John Wynne, as I often do when I'm at the feet of the Master. When he said that all labels are libels. Todd, you apologize 100 times in this series about labels.
Sure.
I just think about that, and I don't like labels. I have been labeled all my life,
Sure.
For all kinds of reasons. And I've been labeled all my life, as many people have. So I don't like the labels, and unfortunately, we've just resorted to that as our means of communication. So he reminded me of that, and then I think it might have been the last thing he said is, other than "that's all I got, kid," which is going to become just a common thing for us. But when he said, if you do pastoral ministry right, it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard. And I think that's where we are right now. For those of us who have been on this series, who are leading our churches every day, pastors, lay people, if you're going to do pastoral ministry, and not right as in right or wrong, but right as in disciple making, as in grace-filled and faithful, and that's what I mean by right. It's going to be hard because we're not always all going to agree. Back again, circling back to the uniformity, unity. So.
And as you referenced that if you're going to do ministry, it's going to be hard. And you mentioned Katie Black. I can't help but also think about how hard it's been for her, but how graceful that process has been for her, and the way she laid it out. It was just beautiful, the way she's helped these churches through this process.
Some are wanting to leave, some are wanting to stay, and some are kind of in the middle of those two places. And that's a hard place to be when everybody is a family. And that's a hard place to be when you're feeling those tempers rise, and then knowing, but the next day, if I have a doctor's appointment, I'm calling you to come and take me. If the next day I have a need, you are the brother and sister who's going to be lifting me up. And so wanting to make sure that the family of God is intact as much as possible. Paul talks about as much as possible to be at peace with one another. And so I know that that's a value that these churches hold, is being a family and wanting to try and figure out how to do that together. So on the one side of the coin, you have all of those things that are stress and fear and questions and wanting to get good information to be able to make a good and informed decision. But also through this process has been quite a bit of remembering who we are to and with and for each other, and remembering whose we are in that process.
My response to her podcast was wise beyond her years. That calm, non-anxious spirit that she brought or is bringing to her churches. And she's clear about where she is. They're clear about where she is, yet she is accompanying them in this process in a way that has been graceful for her and for them. And I think that is wise beyond her years.
And so our first episode was with Reverend Weldon Barres. And Weldon spoke about being a traditionalist who has very strong opinions on this, but is not leaving. He's staying.
Yes.
And I think that was an important word, especially to start the series.
Particularly in the current context where much of the language we hear is there is no place for a traditionalist in the United Methodist Church going forward. And I think Weldon spoke to that clearly from his own experience, but I think in a way that sort of expands that conversation to a much broader audience. He was pretty clear about what he would and would not do, in terms of,
Sure.
I will not officiate at a same-gender wedding, while at the same time granting grace to colleagues in other contexts who are serving different mission fields. They're dealing with different types of labels, so to speak, but granting them the grace to in their own context, if and when that is ever, something that does change in the discipline, certainly would have no problem with them doing it as well.
Brothers and sisters with those in the United Methodist Church that I disagree with on these issues and maybe some other issues, but we're still in this together. So to me, it's not a slippery slope. To me, it's very clear. I'm not going to do it, but I love them and support their right to do it.
Understanding that there's a place for traditionalists, progressives, centrists in the United Methodist Church now and going forward. It's a beautiful affirmation of who we are as United Methodists.
And I don't know if I have the story correct, so I'll ask you. I think after Weldon's episode aired, how did we get word of Truman that he wanted to be included? I think he came up to you was it at the Wesley Center?
It was at the Wesley Center for the Fusion Youth event.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
we were talking about this. And I said, you would be a great guest. He said, I'd love to be a guest. As did Katie Black.
Yeah.
And I mean, there were people who said, I can identify with what Weldon Barr has said. And I'd like to be a guest. And we've actually had a couple of people who volunteered to be a guest here. And, this whole idea of room for traditionalists for me is really, really important. And I've shared with the two of you, it has to do with my upbringing and my mother's kitchen and my mother's table. Food was her love language. And so we gathered around the table. Her table was tiny, smaller than this. And there was always room for people at the table. And it wasn't that they were at the table. If there wasn't room at the table, you brought another chair and you just made the circle bigger and bigger. And oh, heaven's sakes, if you've ever been at a Thanksgiving dinner with a bunch of Spanish-speaking Latinos, you know that there's no two people that would ever agree on anything almost at that table. But, if there wasn't a chair, you brought a chair. And so I just think that is back to this notion of the big tent and room for not uniformity, but unity around the table. And I'll just jump here. I don't know if this is where you want to go,
No,
but
go ahead.
That's been part of our United Methodist history, is this way that we can come to the table. Almost every guest in one way or another said something about, I can ask 1,000 questions in this United Methodist Church. That's why I came here. Those of us who came later on in life, we weren't born into this church. So disagreement, discernment, questioning has always been celebrated in the United Methodist Church. And all of a sudden, it's being disparaged.
Yeah.
And I'm just trying to wrap my head around that notion where it has been why people have come to the church. I think maybe it was Truman that talked about that. Either Truman or Robert Johnson, about coming here because they could express themselves. They could disagree. They come from different kinds of backgrounds, or Truman had, to this table. Yet we had grace for him at this table where he could ask. You could, Todd, you came to the church. You're always asking questions. That's just who you are.
Yeah.
Asking your 1,000 questions. That's the hardest thing for me to wrap my head around, is something that was so important to United Methodism, and we celebrated, and now it's disparaged.
Yeah.
I think it was John Wynne, if I could, because I'm in you saying that, Bishop. He talked about entering the Roman Catholic Church under one sacrament and leaving it under another.
Yeah.
And the reason, and the second part of that was because there wasn't room at the table for everyone. And obviously he's talking about the sacrament of Holy, the Lord's Supper, as he said it. But that has been a fundamental affirmation of United Methodism. This is not a United Methodist table. It is not a particular church's table. It is the Lord's table. And at the Lord's table, all are welcome. That has drawn people from all walks of life, all traditions.
And I recall Captain O'Bannon, I kind of like the ring of that, when he spoke about in his role as a chaplain, that, you know, he's a chaplain for the Marines, a much younger group of people. And he is sought out many times because he is a United Methodist. And United Methodists are perceived to be more open.
Right.
So whether the officer or the whoever it is comes to him and says, you know, I am Buddhist, I am Muslim, I'm Presbyterian, whatever, I'm Baptist, that United Methodism is the safe place for people to come, and we're talking about a system that's very hierarchical, right? Rank's really important in the armed forces. So for that table to be brought in the middle and for people to just seek out the United Methodists because that's what we're known for.
Often people know I'm United Methodist. They know I occupy the middle ground. And so they see me as a safe place from who they can talk to. It might be a Roman Catholic who knows the answer they're going to get if they go see their priest, or if they're Islamic, they know the answer they're going to get if they see their imam, and they need a place to come and just to talk through the ideas that they're having, the issues that they're facing, and so they might see a Methodist or someone who's in that middle ground to have that conversation.
God, I hope we don't give that.
That's our brand.
Yeah.
That is our brand.
That is our brand.
And you mentioned earlier about the table. Jessica Trahan mentioned that. You know, she said, I do not want to be a part of a church that would exclude someone. And I think the moment in Jessica's episode that just really touched me the most is when she said that there are a group of people who say, I am good enough, but not for these two things. And that just cut me.
I would hate for anyone to view me as a person that would like to exclude someone from a church setting, from the reach of God's love. I mean, that's what it feels like to be on the fringe a little bit, is like, you're good enough for a lot of things, but not for these two. And to be on the other side of that line is a very tangible feeling and experience. And to presume that me being in that camp would in some way, shape, or form want to exclude folks who don't 100% agree with my full membership is a little bit blasphemous. And it's extremely hurtful because us, them is how we got into this mess. Yeah. You know, I heard the descriptor of this tent being a broad tent, and some folks want to shift it and just include a different set of people as opposed to widening it and actually include more people. I think people are afraid of what happens when love is expanded. Love given is not love lost. Love given is love multiplied. It seems like very basic math to me. And I think we need to shift our perspective back to being rooted in how are we loving people, and are we loving people well? And if hurt and harm is being caused, I question if it is rooted in love.
I'm very thankful for Jessica, all of our guests, for coming forward. So I know I'm thankful also for, we talked about the authority of Scripture. And, in our first episode, we talked about the disinformation that's out there. I brought with me a book of discipline from 1864. You might wonder where I got this. Allie Young collects disciplines. I collected baseball cards when I was younger. She collects disciplines. But so thank you, Allie, for pointing this out to me. This is a book of discipline from 1864. And if you go to the book of discipline,
it's a lot smaller, is it not?
It is smaller.
It was intended to be in your pocket.
Yes.
And at your bedside.
The doctrines hadn't changed. They are literally word for word 158, 7 years old.
Yeah.
It hasn't changed. Now, I know the criticism that's out there is that it could change, but it hasn't. And in many ways, it can't.
I think that the current discipline says that they will not.
They will
be
not.
changed. The articles will not be changed.
Yeah. And so this level of disinformation and is just super, super troubling. And I'm glad that we addressed that in the first episode. Thoughts on some of the disinformation?
Well, I mean, I think that again, we've talked a lot about the role of fear in this, and I mean, we live in some uncertain, fearful times across many areas of life. This is just another, I think, way of capitalizing on fear, because fear's a pretty strong motivator for both good and bad, we can say. Unfortunately, oftentimes these conversations are held in a vacuum, and there are many folks out there who probably didn't even know there was a discipline in 1864. We very quickly lose connection with our past, and yet, if we look back on it, it has a lot to teach us, and it can say, though some say tomorrow things might change, they haven't changed since 1864. So I'm going to stand firm on the belief that they're probably going to continue to hold fast for us going forward. And we need to constantly speak back to that in love, with grace,
right.
But pretty consistently firm on that.
And you mentioned Robert Johnson. He had his entire episode was fantastic, and I really appreciated him telling the story of how he reached out to some other groups and asked the question where a centrist would fall, and the answer was you have to make a decision, and that answer was stifling to him, and should really give all of us reason to pause.
And I asked that question, where do I fit as a centrist? And they told me there's no place. I have to choose. Either I'm going to be progressive or I'm going to be a traditionalist. So I asked another person who's with the Global Methodists, okay? And I asked that same question. You have to pick. Why do I have to pick when I just want to love Jesus and God's people? Why I have to pick to be a progressive? Why I have to pick to be a traditional? Why I just can't be right? First of all, why can't just I be a Christian? First of all, well, that's what I want to. I just want to be a Christian.
Well, it's back to that unity question, and again, the broad center has always been part of our United Methodist DNA, and we haven't made people choose, and we are making people choose right now, and unfortunately, when you do the division, the gap just gets it's huge. And when people have to choose right, wrong, in, out, Wesley was not that. Wesley was a yes and person, never either or. And I think that's where we're giving up some of our historic belief and understanding of what it means to be a Methodist today. Is we would we let Robert bring his disagreement. We let Robert. Yeah. Robert and I don't agree on everything, but my gosh, I love Robert as more than anybody around, those are the things that I think one of our guests said, we've got to do everything in love. Yep. And I think we have to rely on that. And this notion of fear really bothers me in that people are making a decision, a monumental historic decision based on fear. Fear of what? And so I think I've told the two of you, I've been in a lot of these rooms that people are talking about. I was the president of the council for 2 years. I've been an officer for almost 9 of my 10 years on the council. I was on the protocol mediation team. I've been in those rooms. And some of the things that people have extracted out of context, sound bites, in many cases are inaccurate, out of context, and they're based on fear. And it never bodes well for people to make decisions based on fear. I know you're smiling because you know this. We've had that conversation. Is when we make decisions based on fear, where's our faith in that? Where is my understanding of God's presence and the Spirit's movement in our midst? Am I doubting that when I make a decision based on fear?
Craig Gillum says that God's middle name is surprise. And I've often said that the number one attribute for God is uncomfort, discomfort. Because, I mean, as much comfort as we find in God, that discomfort is where God resides. Mm-hmm. And so to embrace that. Mm-hmm. And to not be afraid.
Yeah. We've talked a little bit about, making room for grace to work in the midst of this. And, we oftentimes think of grace as something that goes before us. It's a comforting thing. Sometimes God's grace troubles the waters of our lives to help us realize what's most important and what is the number one priority. So you're absolutely right. It's those troubling moments in the midst of all of this that sometimes it's God unsettling us, making us uncomfortable. And sometimes it's. I was thinking when Bishop Harvey was just talking a minute ago, we're in an era when many are saying faith must seek certainty. When I wonder if a more biblically appropriate, theologically sound way of making a similar affirmation would be that faith should always seek a deeper understanding. It's not about seeking certainty, but sometimes it's in seeking a deeper level of understanding that may bring about some certainty, but it's always a process of coming to more deeply understand what God is calling us to do, who God is calling us to be. That's never a static process. That's always a dynamic process that I think John Wynne said so beautifully, I was drawn to. Mm-hmm. It's God's grace that draws us to new places. That's just I can hear that voice. I was drawn to. I don't have the depth, but it sure spoke to me.
One of the things that we wanted to do with our time together is to answer some frequently asked questions that we received either on the Facebook feed or on the YouTube feed or just emailing us, calling us. We've been very open that we want to hear from everyone. And by the way, we have not deleted any comments. We have been very open about that. And so one of the questions that's come up from time to time is what is going to happen? What is potentially going to happen to a person who wants to remain a United Methodist, but his or her church is disaffiliating and is no longer a United Methodist? What is the recourse for that person?
Our work, and this will be at every time these votes are taken, is to help people find a new place. In some cases, it may be a church that is in the neighborhood or in the same town. In some places, we're going to start planting new churches where there is a missing footprint. We've got to do that where the mission field is right. That's the thing that I think we can't risk. We can't risk the mission.
Yeah.
We cannot risk the mission. So because the United Methodist Church chooses to disaffiliate, that doesn't mean the United Methodist presence chooses to do the same. We will guide people to another United Methodist Church, or you're going to see us start planting new churches in areas where the mission field is ripe for United Methodists. So I want to make sure people know that we will help them find a home.
Yeah.
We will help them find a home.
And I'm immediately thinking of Katie Black and guaranteed appointments. Yeah. And I think about home. I think of Katie as maybe when she was here, potentially thinking, am I going to have a home?
Yes.
And of course, the answer is yes.
Yes. United Methodists, we have guaranteed appointments. And so
And that's a good thing.
that's a great thing. And Katie Black will have an appointment, regardless of what her churches do. She will have an appointment. Guaranteed appointments. And I've actually kind of had some change of heart over time on this, particularly as a person of color, as a female. Guaranteed appointments are really important. I would say people who are marginalized are at risk if there is no guaranteed appointment. That is what opens up the possibility for us to serve more fully. Now, we still make mission field appointments. We're going to be in consultation with churches, as we already are and have been. That is part of how we make these decisions. But we are going to make the right decision, the best we can do for a church, making sure we call it a mission field appointment, that we're making the appointment, the right person to the right place. But guaranteed appointments really address the people who are most marginalized. There are churches in 2022 who said, don't send me a female and don't send me a Black person in Louisiana Annual Conference. We had a great superintendent who stood up to that and said, I'm offended by that. That's because guaranteed appointments allow for us to make sure that there is nobody marginalized in the appointment process.
Well, again, I hope that this video series has been useful. I think, there's a lot of conversations that are happening right now, and we wanted to have a conversation about staying. We wanted to talk about the value of staying and what it means to you personally at home. And we hope that this series has helped kind of reinforce some of those reasons why you want to stay. We hope it helps the congregations, and in turn, we hope that it helps the communities.
Yeah, I mean, courage to stand firm as a United Methodist Christian and stay.
Yeah.
And stay committed to the mission. Stay committed to the gospel. Stay committed. It's not the institution that we're holding up. It's the mission that the institution is trying to serve.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of our core values, that we hold nothing sacred,
but the mission.
The mission. And I think that's at stake here. That's at stake here. And I just pray that as churches have gone through the discernment and continue to go through discernment processes, that they really weigh what is at stake. And to be true to the gospel, to be true who God has called you to be in your community. But there's a lot at stake here that we've got to continue to remember.
Maybe as a final word, I wanted to get your thoughts on something that we talked about in the John Wynn episode. So maybe it's fresh in my mind because we just recorded that episode. But it was an Episcopal address of yours where you were referencing the gnarly, I think you used that word, the gnarly roots of, is it the sequoias in California?
Redwoods.
The redwoods in California, about how those roots hold the tree up and are designed to be intertwined. Give me your thoughts again on that. I think it's important.
And I think the word I used was entanglement.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes we think of entanglement in a negative way, or gnarly as negative. And when you see all of those roots, they're not necessarily deep.
Yeah.
They're really shallow roots, but it's their entanglement. It's the intertwinedness. I don't know if that's a word. That they're intertwined is what actually holds those trees up. They hold one another up. And I did a lot of research on trees in preparation for that. The seedlings. So if it loses a branch, it regenerates itself.
Yeah.
So this deeply rooted, not necessarily deeply rooted, but deeply rooted together is what connectionalism is in the United Methodist Church. That's what it means to be a vital web of interactive relationships from the theological task, is our ability to hold one another up when there are fires, when there's disease, when there are hurricanes and floods. our intertwinedness, our entanglement, our gnarliness is what keeps us alive and standing.
Yeah. It's what keeps us staying
Today
and into all of our tomorrows. So thank you. I thank both of you. I thank you for, sitting here with me this whole time.
It's been great. It really has. And thank you. I mean, this was not an environment, as I said to you to begin with. This is way outside of my comfort zone, and you've been very patient with me. So, and I don't think we can say thank you enough to you as well for your leadership in this.
I was going to say that to you and to William, that people never see, who's behind the,
absolutely.
Yep,
the
absolutely.
cameras
Yeah,
over here.
Yeah.
This has been a gift to the United Methodist Church, a gift to the Louisiana Conference, and I think in turn a gift to the world, to really understand what it means to be a United Methodist, to stay in the United Methodist Church, and your commitment. You've given unbelievable amount of time to this, and I'm thankful for you and for William for your dedication.
Well, I know I speak on behalf of William. We love the church.
Yeah.
We love the church. And so we want to thank all of you for joining us for all of these episodes. We thank you for your comments. We thank you for sharing all of the episodes. And as much as we're bringing the plane in for a landing here, we also want to encourage all of you. Bishop Harvey mentioned this at the top of the episode. If you have your own story to tell, if you have why are you staying, we have found a way to do that. We're not going to have the studio open for you to come in and to record. I wish we could, but we found a way for each and every one of you to use your cell phone and share with us your staying story. So please head to our website. The information's on the screen, and la-umc.org/staying, and you'll find a way where you can record your own staying story, and we hope you continue to do that now and into the future. So, Bishop, thanks again.
No, thank you.
Yep. Van, thank you. Thanks. For William Willoughby, I'm Todd Rossnagel. Thanks again for joining us. Have a great day, everyone.